If you'd asked me a year ago what my life looked like, I would have painted you a picture of stability, a decent job, a cozy suburban house, and a marriage that, at least from the outside, seemed solid. My wife, Lauren, and I had been together for 7 years. Married for 4. She was the kind of woman who turned heads effortlessly, with sharp green eyes and a smile that could charm anyone in the room. And me? I was just the guy who got lucky enough to marry her, or so I thought. Our relationship wasn't perfect, of course. No one's is. But we had our routines, movie nights on Fridays, brunch on Sundays, and the occasional vacation when life didn't get in the way. Things started shifting about 6 months ago. It was subtle at first. Lauren became more distant, more glued to her phone, laughing at texts she wouldn't show me. I'd ask, "Who's that?" and she'd brush me off with a quick, "Just Rachel from work," or, "Oh, it's nothing important." At first, I believed her. You don't marry someone thinking you'll need to fact-check their every word. Then there were the sudden, girls' nights, and unexplained late returns home. She started wearing perfume to places that didn't require it, quick grocery store runs, casual coffee meetups. She claimed it was just to feel fresh. And I wanted to believe her. I really did, but there's something about the gut. It whispers long before your brain catches up. One night, after she claimed she was meeting friends for dinner, I found myself staring at her side of the closet. Something felt off. Her favorite necklace, the one she always wore on special occasions, was gone. And she never wore it unless she wanted to impress someone. That was the first crack. That I didn't know it yet, but the foundation of our marriage was already crumbling, and soon, it would collapse completely. The days after noticing Lauren's missing necklace felt heavier, like an invisible weight pressing down on me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was overthinking. Maybe she did just want to feel good about herself. Maybe it really was nothing. But the gut doesn't lie, it just waits for you to catch up. A week later, on a Wednesday evening, Lauren said she was meeting her friend Rachel for dinner. It wasn't unusual, at least, not anymore. But something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. She didn't look me in the eye. Just grabbed her purse, tossed a quick, "Don't wait up," over her shoulder, and left. I sat there for a while, staring at the front door long after it closed. Then I did something I'd never done before. I followed her. It felt wrong at first, like I was the one betraying her. But that voice in my head, the one that had been whispering for months, was louder now, almost screaming. I waited 10 minutes, then grabbed my keys and drove. I didn't even know where I was going, just following instinct. My heart was racing, palms sweaty against the steering wheel. I felt like I was about to crash even though I was barely doing 30. Eventually, I spotted her car parked outside this small Italian restaurant downtown, a place we used to go to when we first started dating. The irony wasn't lost on me. I parked across the street, heart pounding in my chest like a drum. Through the large front window, I could see her, sitting at a corner table. But she wasn't with Rachel, she was with him. He was tall, maybe mid-20s, with that messy, effortless charm some guys pull off without trying. His uniform gave him away, a waiter. Not just any waiter. The same one who'd served us a few months back when we had dinner there. I remembered because Lauren had flirted with him right in front of me, laughing a little too hard at his dumb jokes. I'd brushed it off as harmless back then. A mistake. Now, I saw the truth. They weren't just having dinner. They were leaning in close, his hand resting casually on hers across the table. She was wearing that necklace, the one she claimed she'd misplaced last week. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, watching the life I thought I had unravel through a dusty restaurant window. It's strange, the things you notice in moments like that. The way she smiled, not the polite smile she gave me at home, but the real one, the one that crinkled the corners of her eyes. She hadn't smiled at me like that in months. I didn't confront them. Not then. I just sat there, watching until they left together, disappearing into the night like they hadn't just ripped a hole through the middle of my life. That's when the numbness set in, the kind that tells you, this is real and there's no going back. The drive home felt like floating, like my body was there, gripping the steering wheel, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I kept replaying what I saw, Lauren's hand resting on his, her smile, that damn necklace glinting under the dim restaurant lights. My chest felt hollow, like something had been scooped out and replaced with nothing but air. When I walked through the front door, the house was dark, silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I sat on the couch, staring at the empty wall across from me, my mind racing with what I'd say when she got home. Hours passed, the door finally creaked open around midnight. I didn't move. I just sat there in the dark as she tiptoed inside, probably thinking I was asleep. She froze when she saw me, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. "Oh," she said, her voice a little too casual. "You're up." I didn't respond. I just stared. She tossed her keys on the counter, pretending everything was normal. "Rachel says hi." That's when something inside me snapped, not like an explosion, more like a quiet, clean break. "Funny," I said, my voice low and steady. "I didn't see Rachel at dinner tonight." Her body stiffened. It was subtle, but I noticed. She turned slowly, trying to mask the flicker of panic in her eyes with that same bored indifference she'd been feeding me for months. "What are you talking about?" I stood up, my heart pounding but my face calm. "I saw you, Lauren. At Trattoria dell'Amore. With him." Her mouth opened slightly, then snapped shut. A second of silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Then she shrugged. "So, you followed me?" Like I was the problem. That I laughed, a bitter sound I didn't recognize as my own. "That's what you're focusing on?" She crossed her arms, her defenses kicking in. "I can't believe you'd spy on me. That's insane, Ryan." I took a step closer, my voice still controlled, though every nerve in my body screamed. "You're sleeping with a waiter, Lauren. And I'm the insane one?" Her jaw clenched. "I'm not." "Don't," I cut her off. "Don't insult me with more lies." She sighed, rolling her eyes like she was tired of this conversation. "Fine. Yes. We've been seeing each other." The casual way she said it hit harder than the confession itself. No apology. No regret. Just facts delivered like reading off a grocery list. "How long?" I asked, my voice quieter now. She hesitated, then said, "A few months." Months of lies, fake smiles, and "I'm just tired" excuses. "Why?" I asked, genuinely wanting to understand, though I knew nothing she'd say would make it better. She shrugged again. "I don't know, Ryan. Maybe because he makes me feel something. You've been so boring. Predictable. Always the same routine." Her words sliced through me, not because they were true, but because they were designed to hurt. That I took a deep breath, the numbness creeping back, wrapping around me like armor. "You should have just left." She didn't respond. That I grabbed my keys, heading for the door. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "Anywhere but here," I replied, slamming the door behind me. That I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to breathe somewhere she wasn't. That I drove for hours that night, no destination in mind, just the quiet hum of the car engine drowning out the noise in my head. The city lights blurred past, smearing into streaks of white and yellow through the windshield, but none of it registered. I was somewhere between numbness and rage, floating in that strange space where everything feels both too real and not real enough. Eventually, I found myself parked in front of my best friend Chris's apartment. It was almost 3 a.m., but I didn't care. I called him anyway. That he picked up on the second ring, his voice groggy. "Ryan? Dude, what's wrong?" I didn't have the words. I just said, "I need to talk." 20 minutes later, I was sitting on his old, beat-up couch, staring at the floor while Duke, Chris's dog, sniffed around me like he could sense something was off. Chris handed me a beer, the kind of gesture that says, "I don't know how to fix it, but I'm here." That I told him everything, the dinner, the waiter, Lauren's cold confession. The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth, like I was reciting someone else's story. Chris didn't interrupt. He just listened, his face darkening with every detail. When I finished, he leaned back, shaking his head. "She's a piece of work, man." I let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Eventually, Chris said, "What are you gonna do?" I shrugged. "I don't know." But deep down, I did. There was no fixing this. No coming back from it. The next morning, I went back to the house. Not because I wanted to see Lauren, but because it was still my house too. When I walked in, she was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. No tears. No apology. Just the same cold indifference. She looked up briefly. "Did you sleep well?" That's when I realized, she didn't care. She never did that. I didn't respond. I went straight to the bedroom, grabbed a duffel bag, and started packing. She followed me, her arms crossed. "So, what? You're just leaving?" I zipped the bag without looking at her. "What's left to stay for?" She scoffed. "Wow. You're really going to throw away years over one mistake?" I finally looked at her, meeting her eyes. "It wasn't a mistake, Lauren. It was a choice. Over and over again." She didn't have a comeback for that. I grabbed my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and headed for the door. She didn't stop me. She didn't say a word, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. That I was done. Not just with her, but with the life I'd been clinging to out of habit. The marriage, the routine, the illusion of happiness, we'd both let it die long before the affair. She just buried it first. When I stepped out of that house with my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, I expected to feel something: anger, grief, regret, but all I felt was empty. Like my heart had been evicted from my chest, leaving nothing but hollow space behind. The kind of emptiness that isn't loud but heavy, like carrying invisible bricks strapped to your back. That I didn't have a plan. I just drove. No destination. No end goal. Just away. Eventually, I found myself parked outside an old motel on the edge of town. One of those places with flickering neon signs and rooms that smelled like stale cigarettes no matter how often they were cleaned. But it was cheap, and more importantly, it was not home. The room was small. Just a bed, a rickety chair, and a TV mounted crookedly on the wall. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing in particular. The silence was deafening. I thought I'd find some clarity in that quiet, but all it did was echo the words Lauren had said to me the night before. "You're really going to throw away years over one mistake?" A mistake. That's what she called it. Like she'd accidentally put the wrong milk in her coffee, not systematically dismantled our marriage behind my back. That I pulled out my phone, scrolling aimlessly through photos of us, vacations, holidays, selfies with forced smiles I hadn't realized were forced until now. Each image felt like a lie frozen in time, a snapshot of moments that meant everything to me and apparently nothing to her. I deleted them all. One by one. But the memories stayed. They weren't stored on my phone, they were etched into my mind, burned into the spaces between my thoughts. The next morning, I woke up in that motel bed with the kind of headache that wasn't from drinking but from thinking too much. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly, even though the truth was it hadn't been quick at all. It had been unraveling for months, maybe even years. I just hadn't wanted to see it. I went back to Chris's place because, honestly, I didn't know where else to go. When he opened the door, he didn't say anything. Just let me in and handed me a cup of coffee like it was any other morning. I think he knew I didn't need words. I needed space to exist without pretending I was okay. We sat on his balcony, watching the world go by below us. After a while, he finally broke the silence. "You're gonna have to face her at some point." I nodded. "I know. I didn't want to." The thought of seeing Lauren again made my stomach twist. But he was right. There was more to deal with: bills, the house, the legal mess that comes with ending something you thought would last forever. That afternoon, I drove back to the house. When I walked in, it hit me how sterile everything felt. The furniture was the same, the pictures were still on the walls, but it didn't feel like my home anymore. It was just a collection of walls and things. Lauren was there, sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like the last few days hadn't happened. She looked up when she saw me. "Oh. You're back," she said flatly. I ignored the casual tone and went straight to the point. "We need to talk about the divorce." She blinked, like she wasn't expecting me to say it so bluntly. Then she set her phone down and crossed her arms. "You're serious?" "Yes." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "Wow. You're really throwing this all away." I stared at her, my jaw clenched. "You threw it away, Lauren. I'm just cleaning up the mess." For the first time, I saw a crack in her facade. Her face tightened, but she didn't say anything. I grabbed some of my stuff, clothes, important documents, the few things that felt like mine. As I was packing, I found an old photo of us from our honeymoon in Hawaii. We looked happy. Maybe we were. Or maybe I just wanted to believe we were. I didn't take it with me. I left it on the kitchen counter. When I turned to leave, Lauren finally spoke. "You'll regret this," she said softly, almost like she believed it. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Then I looked back at her, standing there in the ruins of what we used to be. "No," I replied. "I regret not leaving sooner." And then I walked out for the last time. Leaving Lauren that day should have felt like crossing a finish line, but instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. No applause, no sense of victory, just a long drop into the unknown. I'd packed my things, said my piece, and closed the door on the life we'd built together, but the emotional debris didn't stay behind. It followed me. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment downtown. It wasn't much, just 4 walls, a sagging couch, and a mattress on the floor, but it was mine. No echoes of betrayal in the corners, no ghost of Lauren's perfume lingering in the air. Just silence. Heavy, unrelenting silence. At first, I thought I'd feel free. But freedom, it turns out, can be suffocating when it's not something you asked for. I filled my days with routine. Wake up. Go to work. Come home. Eat whatever required the least effort. Sleep, if I could. Nights were the worst. That's when the memories crept in, uninvited and relentless. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations, dissecting moments, trying to figure out when exactly it all fell apart. When did she stop loving me? Or maybe the harder question, did she ever? I found myself scrolling through old text messages, not because I missed her, but because I wanted to find the moment the lie began. But there was no clear starting point. It was like trying to find the exact second a sunset turns into night. One day we were fine, and the next, I was watching her hold another man's hand like it belonged there. I started drinking more, not to get drunk, just enough to blur the sharp edges of my thoughts. It worked, sometimes. Other times, it made the loneliness louder. Chris checked in regularly. He'd drag me out to bars or invite me over to watch games, trying to pull me back into the world. I appreciated it, even if I wasn't good company. I'd sit there, nodding along to conversations, laughing at jokes that didn't land, pretending I was okay because people get uncomfortable when you're not. One night, after too many drinks at a dive bar, Chris asked, "You ever think about dating again?" The question hit me harder than I expected. Dating? I scoffed, swirling the last bit of my drink. Why? So I can watch someone else fall out of love with me? Chris gave me that look, the one that says, "I get it, but you're being an idiot." "Not everyone's Lauren," he said simply. I didn't respond. Because he was right, and that scared me more than the idea of being alone. A few weeks later, I found myself standing outside a coffee shop downtown. I wasn't meeting anyone. I just went. It was the first time I'd been anywhere without feeling like I had to be there. I ordered a black coffee, sat by the window, and watched the world go by. That's when I saw her, not Lauren, someone else. A woman with dark hair, a book in one hand, coffee in the other. She wasn't particularly striking, not in the way Lauren had been, but there was something about her, a quiet confidence, the kind that didn't scream for attention but commanded it anyway. She caught me staring. I looked away, embarrassed, but when I glanced back, she smiled. Just a small, polite curve of her lips, but it felt like the first genuine thing I'd seen in months that I didn't talk to her. Not that day, but it was the first time I realized I could feel something other than anger and sadness, and maybe that was a start. After that brief moment in the coffee shop, the smile from the woman with the dark hair, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not in a romantic, fairy tale way. It wasn't like some movie where time slowed and music swelled. It was just, real. Simple. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something that wasn't tied to Lauren or the wreckage she left behind. The next day, I found myself back at the same coffee shop, sitting at the same table by the window. I told myself it was for the good coffee, but who was I kidding? Part of me hoped she'd be there again. I wasn't even sure what I'd say if she was. Hours passed. No sign of her. I kept going back over the next few days, feeling ridiculous but unable to shake the pull. Some mornings I'd just grab a cup to go, other times I'd sit for hours pretending to read emails while my eyes kept drifting to the door. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, there she was, same dark hair, same quiet presence, this time with a different book in her hand. She ordered her coffee, glanced around, and took a seat 2 tables away from mine. My heart raced in a way it hadn't in a long time. Not because I was in love, not even close, but because the idea of talking to her felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory. Like trying to speak a language I'd forgotten. I sat there for 10 minutes, staring at my coffee, debating whether to say anything. My brain played out every scenario. What if she thought I was weird? What if I stumbled over my words? What if she wasn't interested? But then I thought, what's the worst that could happen? I stood up, walked over to her table, and before I could overthink it, I said, "Hey, I noticed you were reading The Alchemist. That's one of my favorites." She looked up, her eyes meeting mine, warm, curious, not annoyed like I'd feared. She smiled. "Yeah. I've just started it. It's pretty interesting so far." I nodded, feeling the tension ease slightly. "It gets better. It's one of those books that sticks with you." She closed the book, her attention now fully on me. "I'm Anna, by the way." "Ryan," I replied, offering a small, awkward smile. She gestured to the seat across from her. "Want to sit?" And just like that, I did. We talked for over an hour. About books, movies, random stuff like how weird people can be at coffee shops. Nothing deep, nothing heavy. Just easy. When I finally left, I realized I was smiling. A real smile. Not the forced kind I'd plastered on my face for months. It felt strange and familiar at the same time, like waking up from a long nap and realizing the world kept turning without you. Over the next few weeks, Anna and I bumped into each other more, sometimes by accident, sometimes because I just happened to be at the coffee shop at the same time she was. We started exchanging numbers, texting about everything and nothing. I didn't tell her about Lauren. Not yet. I wasn't ready to unwrap that part of me, and I didn't want it to define whatever this was. This wasn't about filling a void. It wasn't a rebound. It was just connection, and for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was more ahead than the mess behind me. Anna became this unexpected constant in my life, like a soft song playing in the background, steady and calming, even when everything else felt loud and chaotic. We met more often, sometimes by coincidence, sometimes because one of us subtly suggested it. Our conversations flowed easily, filled with harmless debates about movies, favorite books, bad coffee, and oddly enough, whether cereal qualifies as soup. She insisted it did. I vehemently disagreed. What I liked most about Anna was how unforced it all felt. There was no pretending, no rehearsing what I'd say, no second-guessing every word. I could just be me, the version of myself I thought Lauren had chipped away at, piece by piece, over the years. But Anna never asked me to be anything more than that. Still, Lauren lingered in my mind like an old bruise, faded but tender when pressed that I didn't tell Anna about her at first. It wasn't that I was hiding it, I just wasn't ready to unpack that baggage in front of someone new. But secrets have a way of creeping into conversations when you least expect them to. One evening, we decided to grab dinner after coffee. Nothing fancy, just a casual diner with neon signs buzzing faintly in the corner. We sat in a booth, laughing over terrible fries and cheap milkshakes, when Anna asked, "So, have you ever been married?" I froze for a split second. My fingers tightened around the glass without me realizing. She must have noticed the shift because she quickly added, "Sorry, that was random." "You don't have to." "No," I cut in gently. I took a breath, staring at the condensation dripping down the glass. "It's fine." "Yeah, I was married." Anna didn't say anything, just waited patiently. "Her name's Lauren," I continued. "We were together for 7 years. Married for 4. Her expression didn't change, no judgment, no curiosity masked as sympathy. Just quiet attention. "What happened?" she asked softly, her voice careful, like she was handling something fragile. That I stared at the table for a moment, the memories bubbling up like they always did. But this time, I didn't drown in them. "She cheated on me," I finally said. "With a waiter." A small, surprised smile flickered across Anna's face, not out of mockery, but because it sounded absurd even to me when I said it out loud. "Well," she replied after a beat, "I guess you could say she really tipped the scales." I burst out laughing, like actual, chest-shaking laughter. It was the first time I'd laughed about it, the first time it felt like just a fact instead of a wound. Anna laughed too, then added, "Sorry, was that too soon?" "Honestly? It was perfect." The tension dissolved, leaving nothing but the warmth of connection. I realized then that the story of Lauren was just that, a story. Something that happened, not something that defined me. After dinner, we walked for a while, the city lights casting long shadows on the pavement. There was a comfortable silence between us, the kind that didn't need to be filled. When we reached her car, Anna turned to me. "You know, you're not broken." I didn't expect that. It hit me harder than I thought it would. I managed a small smile. "Yeah. Yeah," she said confidently. "You're just a guy who went through something crappy. Doesn't mean it's who you are." I nodded, her words settling somewhere deep inside me. "Thanks, Anna." She smiled softly. "Anytime, Ryan." I watched her drive away, standing there for a moment under the streetlight, realizing that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about Lauren as the woman who broke me. I was thinking about Anna as the woman who reminded me I wasn't broken at all. And maybe that was the real beginning. After that night with Anna, something shifted. It wasn't like flipping a switch, more like realizing you've been holding your breath and finally exhaling without even noticing. For months, I'd been carrying Lauren around like some invisible shadow. Even when I wasn't thinking about her, she was there, in the corners of my mind, tucked between every "what if" and "why me." But Anna's words echoed in my head, "You're not broken." Simple. Direct. The kind of truth that stings because it's exactly what you need to hear. We started seeing more of each other after that, coffee dates turning into dinners, random walks, late-night talks about nothing and everything. With Anna, there was no pressure. No unspoken expectations. Just the comfort of knowing I could be myself, even when that self felt a little messy, a little bruised. One afternoon, as we sat on a park bench watching people pass by, she asked, "Have you talked to her since?" I knew who she meant, Lauren. That I shook my head. "No. Haven't seen her, haven't heard from her." Anna didn't push. She just nodded, her gaze following a group of kids chasing each other across the grass. But later that night, her question lingered. I hadn't thought much about Lauren in weeks, but now the idea of talking to her again sat in my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch, not because I missed her. Not because I wanted closure, I'd found that, in my own way, but maybe because I needed to see if the person who'd once shattered me still had that power. The next day, I sent Lauren a text. Simple. No emotion behind it. Can we meet? Just to talk. She replied faster than I expected. Sure. Tomorrow at 5? Same coffee shop near the old place. I stared at the message for a while, wondering why my chest felt tight. Not with longing, just anticipation. Like facing a ghost to prove it wasn't haunting you anymore. When I walked into the cafe the next evening, she was already there, scrolling through her phone, her face lit by the blue glow of the screen. She looked the same, perfectly put together, like she always was. But she felt smaller. Not physically, but in presence. Like whatever version of her I'd built up in my mind had shrunk under the weight of reality. She looked up when she saw me. Hey. I sat down across from her. Hey. There was an awkward pause, filled only by the clinking of coffee cups and murmured conversations around us. I didn't think I'd hear from you, she finally said, sipping her latte. I nodded. I wasn't planning on it. She raised an eyebrow. So, why now? I took a deep breath, steadying my thoughts. Because I wanted to know if seeing you would still hurt. Her expression flickered, surprise, maybe even a hint of guilt, but she recovered quickly, masking it with that same cool indifference she'd always worn like armor, and, she asked that I shrugged. It doesn't. That was the truth. Sitting there across from her, the woman who'd once been my whole world, I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just the clarity of distance, both emotional and literal. She looked down at her coffee, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. I didn't mean to hurt you, Ryan. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because the words felt so empty, like throwing a pebble into the ocean and expecting waves. You did, I replied. But that's not my burden anymore. She nodded slowly, maybe realizing she no longer had any power over me. We didn't talk much after that. No rehashing the past, no deep conversations. Just two people who once loved each other sitting across a table, now strangers bound only by memories. When I left, I didn't look back. I texted Anna later that night. Saw her. Didn't feel a thing. She replied almost instantly. Told you. You're not broken. And for the first time, I didn't just believe it, I knew it. After meeting Lauren, something unexpected happened. I felt free. Not the dramatic, movie-style freedom where you run through the streets in the rain with triumphant music blaring in the background. No, it was quieter than that. Subtle. Like realizing a splinter that had been stuck in your skin for months was finally gone. There was no pain anymore, just the absence of it. I didn't tell Anna every detail about the meeting, but she knew. She could see it in the way I carried myself after that day. I felt lighter. More present. The past wasn't something I was dragging behind me anymore, it was just behind me. Our relationship grew naturally, without labels or pressure. We weren't rushing into anything, just enjoying the process of getting to know each other. She never tried to fix me. She never treated me like I was fragile, like some cracked vase she needed to handle with care. She saw me as whole, even when I wasn't sure I was, and maybe that's what made the difference. One evening, we found ourselves back at the same coffee shop where we first met. The same window seat. The same easy conversation. She looked at me over the rim of her coffee cup, her eyes curious but kind. Do you ever think about the future? She asked casually, like she wasn't asking a question that would stick with me long after the coffee had gone cold. I thought about it for a moment. The future used to be something that scared me. When Lauren left, it felt like every plan, every dream I had for what's next, had been burned to ash. But sitting there with Anna, I realized the future didn't feel like a dark tunnel anymore. It felt open. Like a blank canvas instead of a locked door. I finally replied. But for the first time in a long time, it's not about what I've lost. It's about what I can build. She smiled at that, a soft, genuine smile that didn't ask for anything in return. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Life settled into something that felt right, not perfect, not flawless, but real. I found myself rediscovering things I'd forgotten I loved: photography, late-night drives with no destination, reading books that had been collecting dust on my shelves. Not because I needed distractions, but because I was living for me again. And somewhere along the way, Anna became more than just the woman who helped me feel whole again. She became part of the life I was rebuilding. One day, we were walking through a park, Duke trotting happily ahead of us, his leash slack in my hand. The sun was setting, casting everything in gold. Anna reached for my hand, her fingers lacing with mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. She looked at me and said, "You're different now." I raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "You're not holding your breath anymore," she said softly. I thought about that, realizing she was right. I'd been holding my breath for so long, waiting for the next betrayal, the next disappointment, the next heartbreak. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I was here, breathing, living, loving, not because someone filled a void, but because I realized there was never a void to begin with. Just space I hadn't claimed as my own yet. That night, I pulled out the old notebook I'd kept since the day everything fell apart. The pages were filled with messy, angry, heartbroken words, proof of the person I'd been and the pain I'd carried. I flipped to the last page and wrote, "I'm not the man she left. I'm the man who stayed. I'm not the man who was broken. I'm the man who healed, and now, I'm the man who finally knows how to live." I closed the notebook, tucked it away, and smiled to myself, because this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. Time has a way of softening sharp edges. What once felt like deep, jagged scars eventually fades into faint lines, reminders, not definitions. I used to think my story was about what Lauren did to me, the heartbreak, the betrayal. But standing here now, I realize it was never about her. It was about me. It's been over a year since I left that house, packed my life into a duffel bag, and walked out the door with nothing but questions about who I was without her. I didn't know then that losing her would be the best thing that ever happened to me, not because she was gone, but because it forced me to find the parts of myself I'd buried beneath the weight of us. Anna and I are still together. But this isn't the part where I tell you she fixed me, because she didn't. She couldn't. No one could. What she did was something even more valuable. She showed me that I wasn't broken to begin with. She held up a mirror, not to reflect my past, but to show me the man I'd become in spite of it. We're not perfect. No couple is. But there's honesty between us, the kind that doesn't need to be forced or faked. We've built something real, not from the ruins of my past, but from the lessons I carried forward. One sunny afternoon, we went back to the park where she first told me I wasn't holding my breath anymore. Duke was older now, slower, but still chasing squirrels like he had something to prove. We sat on the same bench, watching him, and Anna turned to me with that familiar, soft smile. "You've come a long way," she said. I nodded. "Yeah. And I wouldn't change a thing. Because that's the truth. If I could go back, I wouldn't erase the pain. I wouldn't undo the heartbreak. Those moments carved out space for growth, for resilience, for understanding what it truly means to heal. Pain taught me lessons that comfort never could. I reached for Anna's hand, our fingers fitting together the way they always did, easy, natural. "I spent so much time thinking my story ended when she left," I said quietly. But it didn't. Anna squeezed my hand gently. "No. It began." And she was right. Later that evening, back at our apartment, I found the old notebook I'd carried through every stage of my healing. Flipping through its pages felt like walking through the different versions of myself: the angry man, the heartbroken man, the man who didn't know who he was without someone else. On the very last page, beneath all the scribbles and faded ink, I wrote one final line: "I was never lost. I was just waiting to find myself." I closed the notebook, placed it back on the shelf, and didn't feel the need to open it again, because my story wasn't in those pages anymore. It was right here, in the life I'd created, the love I'd found, and the man I'd become. And for the first time, I wasn't looking back.